They took everything from her the night she wore her mother's bracelet for the last time. Celeste Ravencroft stood in the great hall of the Thornridge Pack, still wearing the silver band her mother had clasped around her wrist 14 years ago. The bracelet was a simple thing, hand-forged with a single moonstone set in its center like a pale eye. Her mother had pressed cracked lips to Celeste's forehead that morning, 8-year-old fingers too small to understand what goodbye meant. You carry something extraordinary inside you, little sparrow. Don't let anyone convince it isn't there. That was 14 years ago. Celeste was 22 now, and the extraordinary thing had never arrived. The great hall blazed with golden light spilling through stained glass windows. Each pane depicted wolves mid-shift, muscles tearing, bones breaking, new forms rising. Beautiful violence, sacred transformation, everything Celeste had never been allowed to become. 300 wolves filled the space, their collective energy, a tangible pressure against her skin. She could not feel it the way they did, could not sense the electric hum of pack bonds weaving between bodies like invisible thread. She was wolfless, and in the Thornridge Pack that word carried more weight than any curse. For 5 years she had stood at Garrett Caldwell's side. 5 years of absorbing whispers and sidelong glances. 5 years of enduring the small, daily cruelties that came with being the only wolfless member of a pack that prized the shift above all else. She had done it because Garrett had promised her it would be worth it, because he had looked into her eyes when they were 17 and sworn she was enough. She had believed him. God help her, she had believed every word. Now Garrett stood on the raised platform at the far end of the hall, and the woman beside him was not Celeste. Vivian Sterling wore white silk that caught the light like water. Her auburn hair cascaded over bare shoulders, and her wolf practically radiated through her skin. Dominant, beautiful. The daughter of the wealthiest alpha in the Eastern Territories. Everything Celeste could never be. Garrett's hand rested on Vivian's lower back. Possessive, final. The hall went quiet. 300 wolves fell silent as Garrett raised his other hand, and Celeste felt the first crack forming in the architecture of her self-worth. Celeste Ravencroft was never my chosen mate. His voice rang with alpha command, the harmonic resonance that could compel obedience in every wolf within range. It rolled through the hall like thunder, and Celeste felt it land on her skin and slide away. She had always been immune to alpha compulsion, one small mercy in a lifetime of exclusions. She is wolfless, broken. I hereby dissolve our bond and name Vivian Sterling as your new Luna. The words hung in the air like struck crystal. Celeste waited for someone to object, for a single voice to rise in protest, for one person in this crowd of 300 to stand and say this was wrong, this was cruel, this was a public execution disguised as ceremony. No one spoke. The bracelet burned cold against Celeste's wrist. Not hot the way magic was supposed to feel in the old stories. Cold like the first touch of frostbite, like something waking from a long sleep in the dark. She did not scream. She did not cry. She simply turned and walked toward the massive oak doors at the hall's entrance, her bare feet silent on the stone floor. The ceremonial silver dress clung to her body, thin as paper, designed to be beautiful rather than warm. Behind her, the hall erupted in celebration. Music swelled. Glasses clinked. The collective howl of a pack welcoming its new Luna rose to the vaulted ceiling. The sound burrowed into Celeste's chest like a blade. She pushed through the doors and stepped into the rain. The rain had teeth that night. Celeste felt it gnaw through the thin fabric of her dress as she stumbled down the stone steps, her bare feet slapping against wet granite. Behind her, the golden light of the great hall spilled through the windows, painting the rain in amber streaks. She did not look back. The compound's manicured grounds stretched before her, perfectly maintained lawns and ornamental gardens, giving way to the dark wall of thornwood forest in the distance. Ancient oak and black pine rose like a fortress, miles of wilderness that even experienced wolves avoided after dark. Celeste had heard the stories. Rogues, territorial predators, things that moved between the trees and left no tracks. She reached the iron gates at the compound's edge and found them locked. Of course they were locked. The ceremony was supposed to last until dawn. No one was meant to leave. Celeste pressed her forehead against the cold iron and breathed. Her fingers found the bracelet, turning the moonstone like a worry bead. The metal was freezing against her skin, but she could have sworn she felt heat pulsing from the stone itself, a faint rhythmic warmth like a second heartbeat. Running away, the voice came from the shadows to her left. Celeste spun, her heart hammering against her ribs. A man stood in the darkness beneath the perimeter wall, leaning against the stone with his arms folded. He was tall, taller than Garrett, which was unusual, dressed in a dark coat that made him nearly invisible in the rain. His features were hard to make out, but she caught the glint of eyes watching her with an expression that was not pity. It was recognition. "The gate's locked," he said. His voice was low, unhurried, carrying a strange resonance that made the hairs on Celeste's arm stand up. "But there's a gap in the wall about 40 yards east. Groundskeeper never fixed it." Celeste stared at him. "Who are you?" He tilted his head slightly, rain dripping from dark hair. "Someone who knows what it looks like when a person has just lost everything and is deciding whether to survive it." The rain hammered between them. Celeste's teeth were chattering. She could feel the cold settling into her marrow, her body reminding her of all the ways it was fragile and mortal and small. "I'm going to survive it," she said. She didn't know if it was true. The stranger nodded once. "Then go east." She went. The thornwood was alive with sounds Celeste couldn't decode. Every wolf she had ever known could read a forest the way a scholar reads a page. The snap of a twig parsing into species and distance. The layered scent of soil and sap and animal musk composing a three-dimensional map of everything breathing within a mile. Celeste heard only chaos, rain striking leaves, wind bending branches, the wet thud of her own heartbeat. She walked for 2 hours before her legs gave out. She collapsed at the base of an enormous oak, its roots rising from the earth like the fingers of a buried giant. The rain had softened to a persistent drizzle, but the cold had already done its work. Her lips were blue. The ceremonial dress clung to her body like a second skin, the fabric so thin she might as well have been wearing nothing. Celeste pressed her back against the oak and drew her knees to her chest. She told herself she was not going to die in this forest because a man had decided she was not enough. The bracelet's moonstone was warm. That was strange. It should have been freezing. She held it close to her face and watched the stone pulse with a faint opalescent light, so subtle she might have been imagining it. Her mother had called it a lunaris stone, said it was carved from the heart of a moon crystal found only in the northern mountains. A bloodline relic. Celeste had always assumed it was just a story told to comfort a wolfless child. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, not trying to be quiet. The stranger from the gate emerged from the tree line carrying a wool blanket over one arm and what appeared to be a leather pack over his shoulder. In the gray non-light of the forest, she could see him more clearly now. Sharp jaw, dark brows, a nose that had been broken at least once. His eyes were the color of iron, not the warm amber of a typical wolf's gaze, but something colder and older. He moved with a kind of physical authority that made the air feel denser around him. Every step precisely calibrated as though the ground rearranged itself to meet his feet. "You're hypothermic," he said, kneeling beside her without invitation and draping the blanket around her shoulders. It smelled of cedar and wood smoke. Celeste pulled it around herself with shaking hands, and the relief was so overwhelming, she almost cried. "Why are you following me?" she asked. "Because you walked into a forest full of rogues and territorial predators, wearing a wet dress and no shoes, and I have a functioning conscience." He opened the leather pack and produced a thermos. "Drink, it's just broth." She drank. The heat of it spread through her chest like a slow fire, and the shaking in her hands began to subside. "My name is Theron," he said, settling onto his heels. "I was passing through Thornridge territory when I saw the ceremony. I'm guessing you didn't plan to spend tonight in the woods." "I didn't plan any of this." Celeste's voice came out ragged. "I was supposed to be named Luna tonight. Instead, I'm—" She stopped. The word homeless hovered on her tongue, but it was too small. She wasn't just without a home. She was without a pack, a mate, a purpose, and identity. Everything that had defined her existence for the past 5 years had been amputated in a single public sentence. "You're free," Theron said. Celeste looked at him sharply. "That's a generous interpretation. I've been where you are. Not the specifics, but the feeling of watching someone dismantle your life while an audience applauds." Something hard passed behind his eyes there and gone in an instant. He reached into the pack again and pulled out a smaller bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "I can offer you something," he said. "It's not ideal, but it's practical." He explained. He was traveling north to the Silver Peak territories far from Thornridge, far from any pack Garrett controlled. He needed a companion for the journey, someone to share the road with through disputed lands. In exchange, he could offer her safe passage shelter and an introduction to a pack that didn't measure worth by the wolf inside. "There's one complication," he added. "The northern border checkpoints require pair bonding documentation. Lone females get detained. Trafficking concerns. If you travel with me, we'd need to register as mates." Celeste's stomach dropped. "You want to marry me?" "I want to get you out of here alive. The marriage would be a formality. Paper, nothing more. Once you're settled in Silver Peak, we dissolve it. You go your way, I go mine. She should have said no. Every rational instinct told her this was dangerous. A stranger in the woods offering salvation was the beginning of a cautionary tale, not a rescue. But Celeste's rational instincts had also told her to trust Garrett Caldwell, and look where that had landed her. She looked at the bracelet on her wrist. The moonstone pulsed warm steady like a compass pointing north. "When do we leave?" she asked. Theron stood extending his hand. His palm was rough with calluses warm despite the cold. When their fingers touched, Celeste felt something she had never felt before. A low vibration running through her bones, subtle as a tuning fork struck at the edge of hearing. She dismissed it as exhaustion. It was not exhaustion. They were married at dawn in a roadside registry office outside the Thornridge border, witnessed by a half-asleep clerk and a stray cat that wandered in through the open door. Celeste signed her name on the bonding certificate and felt nothing. No spark of sacred connection. No rush of pack magic. No sense of the mate bond snapping into place the way the old stories described. Just ink on paper. A transaction. She told herself this was better than what Garrett had offered. At least Theron was honest about the arrangement's emptiness. The mistake she was making would take weeks to understand. They traveled north through a landscape that shifted from the dense, deciduous forests of Thornridge to the sparse, silver-barked birches of the Midlands. Theron walked slightly ahead, always positioning himself between Celeste and whatever lay around the next bend. He carried a single leather pack that seemed to contain an improbable number of supplies. Blankets, food, fire-starting materials, a first aid kit, spare clothes that somehow fit Celeste despite him having no way to know her measurements. He never complained about the pace she set slower than any wolf would tolerate. Her human endurance was a constant limitation, and he adjusted for it without comment. On the first night, he built a shelter from pine boughs with a speed and efficiency that spoke of years lived outdoors. He started the fire with flint and steel, rather than matches, an old-fashioned choice that Celeste found oddly charming. When a patrol of rogue wolves passed within a quarter-mile of their camp, Theron simply stood, positioned himself between the fire and the dark, and waited. The rogues moved on. He sat back down without comment, as though redirecting predators was no more noteworthy than adjusting a log. What he did not do was talk about himself. Celeste noticed this on the second day. She had shared everything, her childhood in Thornridge, her mother's death from an illness the pack healers couldn't name, the years of quiet exclusion that came with being the pack's only wolfless member. She told him about the first time Garrett held her hand at the Moonfire dance when they were 17, and the last time he looked at her before turning to Vivian. She told him how the distance between those two moments would contain the entire architecture of her self-worth. She told him about the bracelet and the moonstone and her mother's whispered promise. Theron listened to all of it with an intensity that felt almost physical, as though he were absorbing her words through his skin. He asked precise, careful questions. He never offered empty comfort. But when she turned the questions back on him, his answers were smoke. "Where are you from?" "I travel a lot." "What pack?" "No fixed territory." "Why were you at Thornridge?" "Business brought me south." She should have pushed harder. That was the mistake. Not the marriage itself, but the willingness to accept mystery as kindness. Theron was gentle with her. He kept the fire burning through cold nights. He taught her to identify edible roots and showed her how to read weather in the movement of birds. When they stopped to sleep, he always took the outer position, his body a wall between her and the dark. And sometimes in the thin light before dawn, she caught him watching her with an expression that didn't match the clinical arrangement they'd agreed to. It was the look of a man seeing something he'd been searching for without knowing he was searching. The bracelet was changing. Celeste first noticed it on the fourth morning. The moonstone, which had always been a pale milky white, had developed a thread of gold running through its center, like a vein of light buried in the crystal. She held it up to the sun and watched the gold shift and pulse. She felt that same low vibration she'd experienced when Theron first took her hand. Deeper now, more insistent. "Your stone," Theron said one evening, watching her rotate the bracelet by the fire. His voice had a strange quality, cautious, as if he were choosing every word from behind a locked door. "Where did your mother get it?" "She said it was a family heirloom, a Lunara stone from the northern mountains. I always thought it was just quartz with a pretty name." Something tightened in Theron's jaw. "It's not quartz." "What is it then?" He was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled. An owl called from somewhere in the dark canopy, and Celeste watched its shadow cross the moon. "It's a soul anchor," Theron said finally. The Lunaris bloodline used them to store a piece of their wolf spirit if the carrier couldn't shift. If their wolf was dormant or suppressed, the stone held the essence safe until it was ready to wake. Celeste's hand closed around the bracelet. You're saying my wolf is in this stone? I'm saying it's possible. How do you know about Lunaris bloodlines? Those are myths, children's stories. Theron met her eyes across the fire, and for just a moment his irises caught the light and reflected it back in a way that was not wolf amber and not human brown, but something else entirely. A deep liquid silver that seemed to contain its own inner illumination. Not all children's stories are fiction, he said. Celeste filed this away as another piece of the mystery she had married. She told herself she would demand real answers in the morning. She told herself the warmth she felt when he looked at her was just the fire. The morning came and she asked nothing. The warmth stayed. By the seventh day they had reached the foothills of the Silver Peak Range, and Celeste had fallen in love with a man whose real name she did not know. Silver Peak was not a pack, it was a kingdom. Celeste understood this the moment they crested the final ridge and the valley opened below them like a cupped palm holding a city made of silver stone. Towers rose from the mountain shoulders, their spires catching the morning light and scattering it into prisms. A river threaded through the city's heart, crossed by arched bridges that seemed to float without visible support. Thousands of structures cascaded down the valley walls. Homes, markets, training grounds, temples, all carved from the same luminous gray granite that gave the territory its name. And everywhere wolves. Not the scattered territorial packs of the lowlands, but an organized, thriving civilization. Celeste could see them even from this distance. Figures moving through streets, shifting between forms with an ease that suggested the transformation was as natural as breathing. This is Silver Peak, she whispered. This is Stormwatch, Theron said. The capital. Capital of what? He didn't answer. They descended into the city, and Celeste noticed immediately that something was wrong. Or rather, something was impossible. People recognized Theron. Not the casual recognition of a familiar face, but the sharp electric acknowledgement of authority. Merchants straightened behind their stalls. A group of soldiers in gray leather armor snapped to rigid attention. A woman carrying a basket of bread dropped into a bow so deep her forehead nearly touched the cobblestones. Theron walked through it all without breaking stride, his hand resting lightly on the small of Celeste's back. A gesture that was simultaneously protective and possessive, though she was too stunned to parse the difference. Theron, she said, her voice thin. Why is everyone bowing? They had reached a courtyard at the base of the largest tower. A man was descending the steps to meet them. He was older, silver-haired, wearing a formal coat embroidered with a sigil of a wolf crowned in moonlight. He stopped before Theron and placed his right fist over his heart. Welcome home, Your Majesty. The words hung in the air like struck crystal. Celeste felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. Theron. He turned to face her. His expression was open in a way it hadn't been for the entire journey. Stripped of deflection, raw with something that looked terrifyingly like vulnerability. My name is Theron Ashford, he said. I am the Lycan King of the Northern Territories. I should have told you sooner. I'm sorry. Celeste's first thought was absurd, of course. Of course, the stranger who rescued me from the rain is a king, because the universe has a very specific sense of humor about my life. Her second thought was less composed. The Lycan King was not merely an alpha. The Lycans were the oldest bloodline in shifter history. The original wolves, the ones from whom all packs descended. Their king held dominion not over a single pack, but over every wolf in the northern continent. His power was not political, it was biological. His command could reach into the marrow of any shifter and compel obedience at a cellular level. And she had married him in a roadside office, witnessed by a stray cat. The registration, she said, her voice barely a whisper. The bonding certificate. That wasn't just paperwork. It was recognized by Lycan law the moment you signed it, Theron confirmed. You are technically and legally the Lycan Queen. I'm wolfless. I know. I can't shift. I can't sense pack bonds. I can't. Celeste. He took her hands. The vibration was back stronger than before, running through their joined fingers like a current. I knew what you were when I found you at that gate. I knew what you were and I married you anyway. Not despite what you lack, because of what you carry. His eyes dropped to the bracelet. The moonstone was blazing now, the thread of gold grown into a full radiant vein that cast warm light across their interlocked hands. The Lunaris bloodline isn't a myth, he said softly. It's the oldest wolf lineage in existence. Older than the Lycans. Older than the packs. Your mother was the last carrier. And that stone around your wrist holds a wolf spirit so ancient and powerful that every alpha in the lowlands would go to war for it. Celeste pulled her hands free. Her heart was hammering so hard she could hear it in her teeth. You used me, she said, this whole time. The rescue, the kindness, the marriage. It was about this bracelet. No, his voice cracked on the word, and for the first time the king looked like a man standing at the edge of a cliff. It started that way. I came south looking for the Lunaris heir. But Celeste, he stopped, swallowed. I didn't expect you. I didn't expect any of this. The courtyard had gone silent around them. Advisors, soldiers, servants, all had stopped to watch the exchange between their king and the barefoot woman in borrowed traveling clothes. Celeste could feel their eyes on her, cataloging, assessing, wondering how this human-looking girl had managed to bind their sovereign. She turned away from him and walked into the tower. The doors closed behind her like the jaws of a new world. 3 days passed in the tower before Celeste spoke to Theron again. She had been given a suite of rooms that were larger than her entire dwelling in Thornridge. Vaulted ceilings stretched overhead, carved with reliefs of wolves running beneath stars. A fireplace tall enough to stand in dominated one wall, its stones blackened by centuries of use. Windows overlooked the river, where silver fish leaped at dawn, their bodies catching light like thrown coins. Servants brought her meals 3 times a day. Roasted meats and fresh bread and vegetables she didn't recognize. They asked nothing of her, spoke only when spoken to. Left her alone with her thoughts, which was perhaps the cruelest kindness of all. A healer named Alara visited each afternoon to check the fading bruises Celeste hadn't realized she was carrying, marks from years of small violences in Thornridge. A shoulder gripped too hard during a pack gathering. A shove in a crowded hallway when she moved too slowly. The kind of damage that accumulates so gradually you stop recognizing it as harm. Alara was a woman in her 40s with silver-streaked black hair and hands that radiated warmth when they touched skin. She never asked about the bruises, never offered pity. She simply cataloged each mark with clinical precision, then pressed her palms against Celeste's temples and breathed. You've been running on survival for a long time, Alara said on the second afternoon. Your body is an archive of it. Give yourself permission to stop. But Celeste couldn't stop. Her mind cycled endlessly between fury and something worse. The creeping suspicion that Theron's deception and Garrett's cruelty were 2 faces of the same coin. Men who saw her as a means to an end. A wolfless girl useful only for what she carried or what she symbolized. The bracelet kept pulsing. It was impossible to ignore now. The moonstone's golden vein had expanded into a web of light that covered the entire surface, and Celeste could feel it communicating with something inside her. A presence deep below conscious thought stirring in its sleep, like a creature turning over in a cave. Sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, she thought she heard breathing that was not her own, a low, rhythmic exhalation that vibrated in her ribs. On the 3rd day, a messenger arrived from Thornridge. Celeste was summoned to the council hall, a cavernous space carved directly into the mountain's heart. Long stone table, high-backed chairs, tapestries depicting battles she didn't recognize. Theron stood with his advisors around the table, and he looked like he hadn't slept. Dark circles under his iron-gray eyes. Tension carved into every line of his body. When he saw her, something in his expression broke open and was quickly buried. Garrett Caldwell has declared war, Theron said without preamble. The words landed like stones in still water. Celeste felt the ripples spread through her chest. He's claiming that our marriage is invalid. Theron continued, his voice carefully neutral. Under Lowland Pact law, a dissolved bond requires a 30-day mourning period before remating. We married within hours. He's using me as an excuse, Celeste said. He's using you as a weapon. Theron's jaw tightened. Garrett doesn't want you back. He wants what you represent. If the Lunaris bloodline truly resides in your bracelet controlling, it would make any alpha the most powerful wolf on the continent. One of the advisors, a gray-haired man with sharp features, leaned forward. Vivian's father has funded an army. Alpha Sterling commands significant resources across the Eastern Territories. 3,000 wolves supplemented by mercenaries. They're marching north. The room contracted around Celeste. 3 weeks ago, she had been a nobody. A wolfless girl, hoping to be named Luna, of a middling pack. Now she was at the center of a continental war, married to a king carrying an ancient bloodline she didn't understand, and the man who had publicly humiliated her was coming to claim her like property. The bracelet flared hot against her skin. The presence beneath her ribs stirred again. Not breathing now, but growling. How long until they reach the border, she asked. 6 days, another advisor answered. A woman with scars running down the left side of her face. Caldwell has moved faster than we anticipated. Our forces are larger, but they're spread across the northern territories. Consolidation takes time. We can hold the mountain passes, Theron said. Stormwatch is built for siege defense, but there's a vulnerability. He turned to Celeste, and she saw in his eyes the thing he didn't want to say. The Lunaris stone responds to proximity, he said quietly. The closer Garrett gets, the more it will react to the threat. If your wolf wakes before you're ready, before the bond between you and the spirit is stable, it could tear you apart from the inside. So I'm the vulnerability, Celeste said. You're the variable. Everything depends on what happens inside you before Garrett arrives. Celeste looked down at the bracelet. The moonstone was almost entirely gold, now warm enough to feel through her sleeve. She thought about her mother's voice. You carry something extraordinary inside you. She thought about the years she had spent believing that promise was a beautiful lie. Teach me, she said, whatever I need to do to survive this, to control whatever is waking up inside me. Teach me. Theron nodded. He crossed the room and stood before her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. Lichens ran hot. She had noticed this on the road, the way the cold never seemed to touch him. The way the air warmed when he was near. It's going to hurt, he said quietly. Waking a dormant wolf is not gentle. Pain I'm familiar with. Something shifted in his eyes then. Not the silver flare of his lichen power, but something softer and more dangerous. The look of a man who has decided that protecting someone is no longer enough. He wanted to heal her, and he knew that healing required truth. I need to tell you something first, he said, about why I really came south, about what I was afraid to say on the road. He told her. He told her that the Lichen King's mate bond is not chosen, it is fated, that he had felt the pull of it the moment he crossed into Thornridge territory, a compass needle swinging toward magnetic north, that he had stood in the shadows outside the Great Hall and watched Garrett Caldwell humiliate her, and it had taken every ounce of his control not to shift right there and tear the alpha's throat out with his teeth. He told her that the roadside marriage was real, not strategy, not convenience. The bond had recognized her before he did. I am sorry, he said. For every hour I let you believe you were alone in this. Celeste touched the moonstone. It pulsed in time with her heartbeat, and for the first time she realized it was also pulsing in time with his. They began that evening. The stone courtyard beneath Stormwatch's central tower was a circle of granite worn smooth by centuries of feet. Theron led Celeste there as the sun set, painting the mountains in shades of copper and blood. The wolf isn't absent, he said, his hands bracketing her shoulders as she stood with her eyes closed. It's buried. Your mother's stone didn't suppress your wolf. It protected it. The Lunaris spirit is not an ordinary wolf. It's something older, and it needed time to mature. The stone gave it that time. 22 years seems excessive, Celeste muttered. Lunaris wolves are patient. The training was physical and psychic simultaneously. Theron showed her how to breathe into the space where the wolf lived. Deep, slow breaths that sank below the diaphragm, below the belly, into the primal territory of instinct and marrow. Feel where the edges of you end, he said, his voice low and steady, and where something else begins. Celeste tried. She breathed the way he instructed, sending her awareness down through layers of flesh and bone. She searched for the presence she had felt stirring in the pre-dawn hours, the breathing that was not her own. For the first hour, she felt nothing but frustration. For the second hour, she felt the vibration, that same tuning fork resonance that had run through her bones when Theron first touched her hand. It was faint, barely perceptible, but it was there, a frequency humming just below the threshold of conscious hearing. Follow it, Theron said, like a thread through a labyrinth. She followed. The vibration led her deeper, past the architecture of her everyday thoughts, past the room where she stored memories of her mother, past the locked door behind which she had shoved 5 years of humiliation and hope, down into a territory she had never known existed. And there in the darkness, something moved. It was not a wolf, not yet. It was the promise of a wolf, a shape made of potential and ancient memory. It pressed against the inside of her consciousness the way a hand presses against a frosted window, and Celeste felt its warmth. Then the pain came. On the second day, Celeste woke with her bones aching. Not the surface ache of overworked muscles, but something deeper. A pressure building from the inside as though her skeleton were trying to expand beyond the constraints of her skin. Alara checked her vitals and frowned. Your temperature is elevated, 102. Your heart rate is too fast. Is this normal? Celeste asked. For a wolf awakening? Yes. for a Lunaris awakening. Alara's frown deepened. There's no precedent, not in living memory. That night, Celeste couldn't sleep. The fever climbed to 104. She lay in the enormous bed in her suite, drenched in sweat, and felt her body wage war with itself. The bracelet blazed on her wrist, the gold light so bright it cast shadows on the ceiling. The presence beneath her ribs was closer now, not pressed against a window, but pacing. She could hear its footsteps, heavy, restless, the rhythm of a caged predator waiting for the bars to break. Theron came to her room without being summoned. He appeared in the doorway with Alara, and the healer stepped aside without a word. He sat on the edge of the bed and placed one hand on Celeste's forehead. His palm was cool against her burning skin. "It's fighting to get out," Celeste whispered. "I can feel it. I know. What if I can't control it? Then I'll be here to make sure it doesn't hurt you." His hand moved to cup her cheek, and Celeste leaned into the touch without thinking. The contact eased something. The fever didn't break, but the pain dulled to a manageable throb. "Sleep," Theron said. "I'm not going anywhere." He wasn't. When Celeste woke hours later, he was still there, sitting in the chair beside her bed, watching the window as dawn broke over the mountains. On the third day of training, Celeste tried to shift for the first time. It happened without warning. They were in the courtyard again, working on the breathing exercises, when the presence inside her surged upward like a wave. Celeste gasped, her spine arching, and felt something enormous try to force its way out of her body. Her vision went white. Her bones began to crack. This was not the graceful transformation she had watched other wolves perform 8,000 times. This was violence. Her ribs expanded, the cartilage tearing with audible pops. Her jaw elongated, teeth grinding against each other as they tried to reshape. Her hands curled into claws that weren't quite claws, fingers breaking and reforming in stuttered jerks. And then her body rejected it. The wolf slammed back inside like a door slamming shut in a hurricane. Celeste collapsed onto the stone, coughing. Blood spattered the granite. Her ribs felt like they had been shattered with a hammer. Alara was there instantly, hands glowing with healing warmth. Theron knelt beside Celeste, his face carved from stone. "What happened?" he demanded. "The spirit is too large." Alara said, her voice tight with concentration, as she worked to knit Celeste's broken ribs back together. "Her body needs to expand first. The Lunaris wolf is trying to emerge, but there's not enough room." "How do we make room?" Celeste gasped, still tasting copper. "Time," Alara said, "and pain. Your skeleton is restructuring itself. The process has already begun, but it will take days, and it will hurt every moment of those days." She was right. The fourth day was agony. Celeste's bones ached with a constancy that made sleep impossible. Her spine felt like it was being pulled apart vertebra by vertebra. Her skull throbbed with pressure that built and never released. She stopped eating because her jaw hurt too much to chew. Theron stayed with her. He brought broth and made her drink. He sat beside her bed and told her stories about the Northern Territories, about the first time he shifted, about the weight of a crown he had never wanted but couldn't refuse. "Why did you come south looking for the Lunaris heir?" Celeste asked one night, her voice hoarse from crying. "Because the old texts say that when a Lunaris wolf walks the earth again, it signals a change in the world's order," Theron said. "Some interpret that as prophecy. Others as warning. I wanted to find the heir before someone else did, before someone who would use that power for conquest rather than balance." "And now you've married her," Celeste said. "Doesn't that make you the one using her? Only if you see yourself as a tool to be used." His eyes met hers. "I don't. I see you as the most extraordinary person I've ever met, and I'm terrified I'm going to lose you before you understand that." The bracelet pulsed between them, warm, steady, a heartbeat they shared. On the evening of the fifth day, as the sun bled red across the western peaks, Celeste felt the wolf's voice for the first time. It was not words. Wolves didn't think in language. But a presence made itself known. Warm, fierce, overwhelmingly female. It radiated a protective fury that made Celeste's eyes water. The wolf pressed against the inside of her consciousness, and this time Celeste didn't just feel it. She heard it. A sound that was part howl and part heartbeat. Ancient, powerful, patient. "I'm here," Celeste thought, pressing back. "I've been waiting for you." The wolf answered, and the moonstone cracked. Not shattered, not broken. The stone split cleanly down the middle, the two halves still attached to the silver band, but separated by a gap through which golden light poured upward like a beacon. Celeste gasped. The pain that had been building for days suddenly released, flooding out of her bones and into the stone. The bracelet blazed white hot, and she felt the wolf step forward in the space they shared. It was not fully awake, not yet, but it was no longer sleeping. Theron appeared in the doorway drawn by the light. His eyes widened when he saw the split stone. "It's happening," he said. "Not fast enough," Celeste whispered. "How much time do we have?" "Garrett's army was spotted at the southern ridge 2 hours ago. They'll reach the border by dawn." Celeste looked at the bracelet. The cracked moonstone pulsed like a wound that wouldn't close. Inside her, the wolf waited. "Then we finish this tonight," she said. They returned to the courtyard under stars. The city below had gone quiet, 3,000 wolves holding their breath as their king and his queen stood in a circle of ancient stone and prepared to wake something that had slept for 3 centuries. Theron took Celeste's hands. The vibration between them was no longer subtle. It thrummed through their joined fingers like a live wire. "The bond between us will anchor you," he said. "When the wolf emerges, it will be disoriented, hungry. It might not recognize you as its carrier, but it will recognize me. The Lycan bloodline and the Lunaris bloodline are old allies. Let me be your tether. What if it tries to kill you? Then I die knowing I helped you become what you were always meant to be." He smiled, and it was the saddest thing Celeste had ever seen. There are worse ways to go. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him this was insane, that they should wait, that there had to be another way. But the wolf was already moving inside her, drawn by the proximity of Garrett's army. It could feel the threat approaching, could smell the intent to claim and control, and it was done being caged. Celeste closed her eyes and dove inward one last time. She followed the vibration down through the layers of her consciousness until she stood in the dark territory where the wolf waited. It was larger than she had imagined. Not an animal, but a force of nature given form. White light radiating from its body. Eyes like molten gold. It looked at her with an intelligence that predated language. "I know you're afraid," Celeste said, though she spoke in feelings rather than words. "I know you've been alone for a long time, but I'm here now, and I'm not going to let anyone take you." The wolf tilted its head. Then it stepped forward and pressed its forehead against hers. In the courtyard, Celeste's body began to change. It was not like the failed attempt 3 days ago. This time her skeleton didn't crack and resist. It flowed, her spine elongated with a series of deep pops that sounded like logs settling in a fire. Her ribs expanded outward, creating space where there had been none. Her skull reshaped itself, and the pain was extraordinary, but underneath it was something else. Power. Celeste felt her perspective shift as her body grew. The courtyard stone fell away beneath her. Her hands became paws, each toe ending in a curved claw. White fur erupted from her skin, and where it touched the air it glowed. Theron stepped back, his eyes wide. Around them, the city began to wake. Wolves emerged from their homes, drawn by a frequency they could feel in their bones. The Lunaris call, a sound that reached into the marrow of every shifter within a mile and reminded them what they were made of. Celeste lifted her head and howled. The sound that emerged from her throat was not a wolf's cry, but something older. A resonance that rolled through the valley like thunder, shaking dust from stone and rattling windows in their frames. Every wolf in Stormwatch fell to their knees, not from compulsion, but from recognition. The Lunaris had returned. Celeste stood in the courtyard on 4 legs, her body massive and radiant, and looked down at Theron. He had shifted into his Lycan form. Taller than her, broader, his features sharpened into something not quite human. His eyes were fully silver. They were matched. King and queen. Lycan and Lunaris. 2 bloodlines that had not stood together in 300 years. "You're beautiful," Theron said, and his voice in this form carried harmonic undertones that made the air vibrate. Celeste wanted to answer, but she didn't know how to form words with this mouth. The wolf inside her was fully awake now, merging with her consciousness. 2 minds flowing together like rivers joining. She felt its memories. Ancient hunts beneath stars that no longer existed. The weight of responsibility for protecting the first packs. The loneliness of being singular. The last. Until now. The wolf turned its attention outward toward the southern ridge where an army approached. It could smell them. 3,000 wolves and the man who had tried to break its carrier. The wolf was patient, but it was also done waiting. Dawn came, and with it war. Celeste stood on the rampart above Stormwatch's main gate, still in her white wolf form. She had not shifted back. The transformation felt too new, too fragile. She was afraid that if she returned to human shape, she might not be able to find this form again. Theron stood beside her in his Lycan form, a wall of muscle and silver eyes. Below them, the valley floor stretched south toward the ridge where Garrett's army had massed. They came with the sunrise. 3,000 wolves poured over the ridge like dark water, their bodies hunched and massive in half shift. At their head, mounted on a black warhorse, because he had always preferred theater to practicality, rode Garrett Caldwell. Even from this distance, Celeste could see him. Her vision had sharpened overnight. She could see the gold embroidery on his battle armor. She could see the thin smile on his face. She could smell him. Ozone and pine, the scent of his alpha power drifting up the mountain on the wind, and she could feel his command trying to reach her. The alpha compulsion rolled up the valley like invisible thunder. Every wolf within range felt it. The Lycan soldiers on Stormwatch's walls braced against the pressure. They were strong enough to resist, but the weight was tangible. Celeste felt it land on her fur and slide off like water on oil. She looked down at the cracked bracelet still fastened around her foreleg. The moonstone's two halves blazed with golden light, and she understood now what her mother had done. The soul anchor had not just protected her wolf, it had hidden it, kept it safe from alphas like Garrett, who would have sensed the power and tried to claim it before it was ready. But it was ready now. Garrett's voice carried up the mountain, amplified by the natural acoustics of the valley. I invoke Alpha's right. Single combat. The female called Celeste Ravencroft is my bonded mate under the old laws. I demand her return. Beside Celeste, the roan growled. The sound was pure threat, a bass rumble that made the stone beneath their feet vibrate. His claim is false, Theron said. He dissolved the bond publicly, but he's counting on the old laws being ambiguous enough to create legal cover for invasion. Celeste looked at the army below, at the man who had called her broken in front of everyone she'd ever known, at the wolves who had followed him here chasing power they thought resided in her bracelet. The presence inside her rose, not asking permission, simply arriving. The wolf had been patient for 22 years. It was done being patient. Celeste's vision went gold. Her spine bowed. She felt the shift begin at the base of her skull, but this time it was not transformation. It was transcendence. Light poured from her white fur, golden and warm, radiating outward like a second sun. The Lunara's frequency built in her chest that ancient resonance that spoke to the original wolf in every shifter's blood. She opened her mouth and howled. The sound rolled across the valley like a physical force. It reached into the bones of every wolf on that field and reminded them of what they had forgotten. That power was not the same as dominance. That strength was meant to protect, not control. That the first wolves had walked the earth as guardians, not conquerors. Garrett's army wavered. Wolves who had been advancing slowed, stopped. 3,000 shifters felt the Lunara's call and remembered who they were supposed to be. Celeste leaped. She cleared the 60-foot drop from the rampart to the stone field below in a single bound, her body impossibly light despite its size. The impact when she landed made the earth groan. Cracked spiderweb through the granite. She stood before Garrett's army alone and let them see what he had thrown away. The white wolf, the Lunara's heir, the light bearer. Every prophecy and children's story made flesh. Garrett's warhorse bolted. The animal knew better than people when to run. He stood in his battle armor, and Celeste could see every detail of his face. The handsome jaw, the amber eyes, the cruel mouth that had kissed her and then unmade her with the same casualness. He was trying to shift. She could see the struggle. Muscles knotting, bones beginning to crack. But his wolf wouldn't come. It was cowering inside him, pinned by the Lunara's presence, the way a subordinate wolf is pinned by a dominant gaze. Celeste shifted back to human form. The transformation was seamless this time. No pain, no violence, just a flowing change of state, like water becoming steam. She stood before Garrett barefoot on cold stone, wearing the same silver bracelet with its split moonstone. Except now, the gold light had settled into her skin. She glowed faintly like embers banked in ash. You called me broken, she said. Her voice carried across the silent field, not through volume, but through the resonance she now understood was her birthright. Every wolf present heard her as clearly as if she were whispering in their ear. You called me wolfless and discarded me in front of my pack. You chose power and money over a bond that was offered to you honestly. Garrett's hand moved to the sword at his side. The weapon that had won him tournaments and intimidated rivals was suddenly absurd. A child's toy held up against the tide. Around him, the mercenaries hired with sterling money were the first to kneel. Their loyalty had been purchased too cheaply to withstand what they were feeling now. Then Garrett's own soldiers began to drop. Not an organized surrender, but an involuntary recognition. The Lunaris wolf did not command, it revealed. Every shifter in range could suddenly feel their own wolf more clearly than ever before. And in that clarity, they could also feel the truth of their loyalties. Many of them had never wanted this war. I'm not going to kill you, Celeste said. That's the difference between us. You see power as a tool for domination. I see it as a responsibility to protect. She stepped closer. Garrett flinched. Actually flinched. His body betraying him the way hers had never betrayed her because her body had never had a wolf to misalign with until now. Your army is free to go, Celeste continued. Any wolf who wants sanctuary in Silver Peak can stay. But you, Garrett, you go home. You go back to your rich Luna and your stolen pack. And you live with the knowledge that the girl you threw away became everything you pretended to be. She turned her back on him. It was the most dangerous thing a wolf could do to an adversary and the most devastating, because it communicated with absolute biological certainty that he was not a threat. Behind her, she heard the sound of a sword being drawn, heard Garris's ragged breathing as he raised the blade. Theron appeared between them in a blur of motion, still in his lichen form. One massive hand closed around Garrett's wrist and the sword clattered to the stone. She gave you mercy, Theron said, his voice carrying the weight of a king's command. Don't make me show you what I wanted to do the night you humiliated her. Garrett looked into the Lichen King's silver eyes and saw his own death waiting there, patient, leashed only by Celeste's will. He stumbled backward, mounting a borrowed horse with shaking hands. Without another word, without meeting anyone's eyes, Garrett Caldwell turned south and rode away, alone. Over half his army remained on the field, kneeling, asking to stay. Celeste held them all. She felt each wolf's thread in the tapestry she could now touch. 1,500 refugees seeking sanctuary from a world that had measured them and found them wanting. She would give them something better. A place where worth was not determined by the strength of your wolf, but by the content of your character. Theron shifted back to human form and stood beside her. His hand found hers and the bracelet pulsed warm between their joined palms. Show off, he said softly. Celeste smiled. It was the first time she had smiled in 3 weeks. You married a Lunaris wolf. You should have expected drama. He laughed. A real laugh, startled and warm, and pulled her into his arms. The bracelet pulsed between them one more time. The soul anchor had done its work. The wolf was home, and the real work was about to begin. 6 months later, the bracelet broke. Not dramatically. No crack of splitting metal, no shower of crystal shards. Celeste was sitting on the stone bench in Stormwatch's east garden, watching the sun set over the Silver Peak peaks when the silver band simply opened. The clasp released as though an invisible hand had pressed the mechanism and the bracelet slid from her wrist into her open palm. The moonstone was dark, not dead. Celeste could still feel a whisper of warmth in its center, but quiet now. Resting. The gold veins that had blazed so brightly 6 months ago had faded to faint traces like the memory of lightning in a summer sky. It's finished, Ilara said from the garden doorway. The healer had become something closer to a friend in the months since the battle. One of the first people in Celeste's life who had chosen to stay without obligation, who saw her as neither broken nor legendary, but simply human, simply herself. The soul anchor served its purpose. Ilara continued, crossing the garden to sit beside Celeste. Your wolf is fully integrated now. The stone can rest. Celeste turned the bracelet in her hands. It was lighter than she remembered. Or maybe she was stronger. Both things were true. The 6 months since Garrett's retreat had been the most demanding and rewarding of her life. She had not simply settled into the role of Lichen Queen. She had rebuilt it. The old model held no interest for her. Queen as ornament, queen as decorative addition to the king's authority, queen as someone who smiled and waved and bore airs and kept her thoughts to herself. Celeste had other plans. She had started with the refugees, 1,500 wolves who had knelt on that battlefield asking for sanctuary. They came from dozens of packs across the lowlands. Some were wolfless like she had been. Others were outcasts for different reasons. Too small, too weak, too strange. The ones who didn't fit the narrow definition of what a wolf was supposed to be. Celeste gave them something better than sanctuary. She gave them purpose. She established a network of safe houses across the Northern Territories. 12 locations, each one staffed by volunteers who understood what it meant to be thrown away. The houses offered shelter, food, and most importantly, healing. Not just for physical wounds, but for the deeper damage that came from years of being told you weren't enough. Ilara had helped design the healing protocols, techniques for wolves whose spirits had been suppressed by trauma or abuse, methods for teaching people to listen to the wolf inside them, without fear, without shame, without the crushing weight of expectation. The work was not glamorous. It involved long meetings with council members who thought resources would be better spent on military expansion. It involved difficult conversations with pack alphas who saw Celeste's network as a threat to their authority. It involved the slow, frustrating labor of changing minds that had been calcified by centuries of tradition. Some of Theron's advisors resisted. The gray-haired counselor Thaddeus had been particularly vocal. A wolfless queen was a liability, he had said in one council session, his voice dripping with condescension. Now you're the Lunaris heir, which makes you valuable. Don't squander that value on charity work. Celeste had looked at him across the long stone table and smiled, the kind of smile that showed teeth. Counselor Thaddeus, she had said, her voice carrying the Lunaris resonance that made every wolf in the room sit straighter. I am not valuable because of what I can do for you. I am valuable because I exist. Just like every wolfless shifter you've ever dismissed. Just like every outcast you've ever ignored. My worth is not conditional on your approval, and neither is theirs. She had let the resonance build just enough that Thaddeus felt his wolf shift uneasily inside him. Just enough that he remembered what it meant to stand before Lunaris. The network stays, she had said, and it expands. We're opening 3 more houses by winter solstice. If you have objections, I suggest you take them up with your wolf and see which one of you wins. Thaddeus had not objected again, but the resistance had not disappeared. It had simply gone underground. Celeste could feel it in the careful way some council members chose their words around her. In the reports that arrived late or incomplete. In the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room. She was changing too much, too fast, and change made people afraid. Theron had become the partner she never dared to imagine. Not the rescuer from the rain. That dynamic had dissolved the moment Celeste found her wolf. But something more profound, an equal. He challenged her when she was wrong, supported her when she was right, and had the rare intelligence to tell the difference. Their mate bond, once a paper formality, had deepened into something that hummed between them like a shared frequency. They were always aware of each other's emotional weather, could feel when the other was angry or afraid or quietly grieving something they couldn't name. They argued sometimes loudly, about policy, about principle, about the pace of reform and the limits of royal authority. But their arguments were clean. No cruelty, no weaponized vulnerabilities, no small cuts designed to bleed out over time. Theron never once made Celeste feel small, and Celeste never once let him carry weight that was hers to bear. One night, 3 months after the battle, they had stood together on the ramparts above Stormwatch and watched the northern lights dance across the Skimpine, green and purple ribbons of light weaving patterns that looked almost like wolves running. Do you regret it? Theron had asked quietly. Marrying a stranger in a roadside office? Celeste had considered the question seriously. I regret that you lied to me about who you were. I regret that I didn't push harder for answers. But I don't regret the choice. Even with everything I didn't know, something in me recognized you. Recognized this. She had gestured to the city below, the lights and windows, the sound of wolves singing their evening song voices harmonizing in ways that made the air feel alive. I didn't know I was choosing to become a queen, she had continued, but I was choosing to survive. And survival led me here. To you. To this work. To a version of myself I never imagined existed. Theron had taken her hand. You are the most extraordinary person I have ever met. You've said that before. It's more true every day. The bracelet pulsed warm between their joined palms, and Celeste had felt the wolf inside her settle with a contentment she had never experienced in her 22 years. Word had come from Thornridge that Garrett's pack was fracturing. The news arrived in fragments carried by travelers and refugees who made their way north seeking the White Wolf Queen. Each one brought pieces of the story. Together they formed a picture of complete collapse. Alpha Sterling had withdrawn his funding after the military humiliation. The alliance that was supposed to cement Garrett's power had instead revealed its foundation of sand. Without Sterling's money, Garrett couldn't maintain the territory he had claimed, couldn't pay the mercenaries, couldn't project the strength that kept rival alphas at bay. Wolves were leaving, not in dramatic exodus, but in quiet departures. Families slipping away in the night drawn by the rumor of a place where worth was measured by character, rather than canine strength. Vivian Sterling had dissolved the marriage after 3 months, returned to the Eastern Territories, taken control of House Sterling after her father's sudden decline. Some said she had poisoned him. Others said he had simply looked at his daughter and realized he had raised something more ruthless than himself. Either way, Vivian now ruled the Eastern Pax with an iron hand. She had sent a letter to Celeste 2 months ago. Brief, formal, an offer of alliance. I have no love for Garrett Caldwell, the letter had read. He was a means to an end that is no longer relevant. The Eastern Territories recognize Silver Peak's sovereignty and the authority of the Lunaris throne. Perhaps we might speak queen to queen about matters of mutual interest. Celeste had accepted the invitation. They had met in a neutral location, a mountain lodge halfway between their territories. Two women who had been positioned as rivals sitting across a table and discovering they had more in common than not. You were supposed to be the consolation prize, Vivian had said, swirling wine in her glass. The wolfless girl he settled for when his father refused to let him pursue real power. I was supposed to be the prize itself. Funny how that worked out. You got what you wanted, Celeste had observed, control of the Eastern territories. And you got what you deserved, Vivian had countered. A throne, a mate who actually values you, an entire kingdom of wolves who would die for you. She had paused. Garrett got exactly what he deserved too, nothing. They had signed a trade agreement that day. The Eastern Territories would supply Stormwatch with grain and textiles. Silver Peak would provide protection and access to Alara's healing protocols. It was a practical arrangement between two women who understood that power was a tool, not a trophy. Vivian had stood to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, she had said, I'm glad you survived him. I'm glad you became this. It was the closest thing to an apology Celeste would ever receive from that quarter. She had accepted it for what it was. Garrett himself had become a ghost story. Reports placed him in a small territory near the southern coast, ruling over a pack of maybe 50 wolves. The mighty alpha of Thornridge, reduced to a minor player that no one feared and no one followed. Some said he had tried to rebuild, tried to reclaim his reputation through strategic marriages and aggressive expansion. But every time he made a move, wolves would remember the day he stood before the Lunaris heir and flinched, would remember that his own wolf had refused to fight for him. You could recover from defeat. You could not recover from cowardice. Celeste had examined her feelings about Garrett carefully, the way Alara had taught her to examine old wounds. Not avoiding the pain, but not living in it either. What she found when she went looking was not hatred. It was something more like clarity. Garrett had done a terrible thing. That thing had set in motion a chain of events that led her to the life she was living now. Both of those facts could be true simultaneously. She did not owe him gratitude for her suffering, but she could acknowledge that suffering had been a teacher, even as she committed to ensuring others did not need the same lesson. One afternoon, a letter arrived bearing Garrett's seal. Celeste had looked at it for a long time, holding the unopened envelope in her hands. Theron had found her in her studies, staring at the letter like it might contain poison. Do you want to read it? He had asked. I don't know. Do you need to read it? Celeste had thought about that, thought about what closure meant. Whether it required words from the person who had hurt you, or whether closure was something you built inside yourself brick by brick until the wall was high enough that their voice couldn't reach over it anymore. No, she had said finally. I don't need to. She had walked to the fireplace and dropped the letter into the flames, watched the paper curl and blacken and turn to ash. Some chapters closed without needing the last word. The sun had fully set now. The garden was filling with the blue-violet light of mountain twilight, and the first stars were appearing over the eastern peaks. Celeste heard footsteps on the path and looked up to see Theron approaching. Still in his council clothes, his dark hair pushed back from his face. He looked tired. The eastern border negotiations had been contentious, and he had spent the day mediating disputes between packs who had been enemies for generations. He looked tired, and he looked beautiful. Council ran late, he said, settling onto the bench beside her, his thigh pressed against hers, warm and solid and real. The eastern packs want to renegotiate border agreements again. They'll come around. You always say that. I'm always right. He smiled, and the exhaustion lifted from his face for a moment. His hand found the bracelet in Celeste's lap, and he lifted it, turning it in the fading light. It let go, he said. It did its job. Celeste leaned her head against his shoulder. Below them, the city of Stormwatch glowed with lamplight and hearthfire. Somewhere in the valley, a wolf howled, a long, clear note that rose through the octaves and hung in the air like a held breath. Another answered. Then another. The pack singing its evening song voices, weaving together in a harmony that was wold and precise and ancient. Celeste closed her eyes. She could feel each voice now. Not just hear it, but feel it the way you feel music in your chest. Every wolf in the valley was a thread in a tapestry she could touch, and she held them all gently the way her mother had once held her. I commissioned something, Celeste said quietly, 12 new soul anchors, for the wolfless children in the network. Theron went still. You're creating more. The technique isn't lost. Alara has been researching the old texts, working with craftsmen who remember the old ways. We're not making exact copies. Each stone will be unique to its carrier, but the principle is the same. Protection, time, a safe place for a wolf to mature until it's ready. That's extraordinary, Theron said. I'm turning personal pain into systemic solution, Celeste said. That's what power is supposed to do. Not hoard itself, not protect itself, transform suffering into healing for the people who come after. She sat up and looked at him. My mother gave me a gift I didn't understand for 14 years. Now I'm passing that gift forward, making sure no child has to grow up believing they're broken just because their wolf hasn't arrived yet. Theron cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, soft and deep and full of things they didn't have words for. When they pulled apart, the stars had fully emerged, thousands of them scattered across the sky like promises being kept. Come with me, Celeste said, standing and pulling him to his feet. There's something I want to show you. She led him through the garden and into the tower, down corridors lit by oil lamps and moonlight filtering through narrow windows. They descended stairs carved directly into the mountain stone, going deeper and deeper, until they reached a level Celeste had discovered only recently. The archive. It was a vast circular chamber, its walls lined floor to ceiling with books and scrolls and artifacts preserved in glass cases. The collected knowledge of the Lycan bloodline going back thousands of years. Celeste had been spending her afternoons here reading the old text, learning the history that had been denied to her in Thornridge, understanding where she came from and what that meant. She led Theron to a case near the center of the room. Inside, resting on a cushion of black velvet, was her mother's bracelet. The silver band gleamed in the lamplight. The split moonstone had been carefully preserved, its two halves positioned to show the gap through which golden light had once poured. Beneath it, a plaque read, Soul Anchor of Lyanna Ravencroft, carried by Celeste Ravencroft, first Lunaris Queen of the modern age. Gift freely given, purpose fully served. I wanted it here, Celeste said, not locked away in a vault, not melted down for its materials. Here where people can see it, where the wolfless children who come through our network can see proof that waiting doesn't mean broken, that dormant doesn't mean dead. Theron's arm came around her shoulders, and they stood together in the quiet archive, looking at the bracelet that had held a wolf spirit for 22 years and then opened like a door when the time was right. Your mother would be proud, Theron said. I know. They stood there until the lamp oil burned low. Then they climbed back up through the mountain hand in hand and emerged into the night air. The city below was settling into sleep, lights winking out in windows, the sound of lullabies drifting from houses where parents sang their children into dreams. Celeste and Theron walked to their chambers, the rooms they shared at the top of the central tower. The fire was already burning in the hearth tended by servants who anticipated their needs. They undressed in comfortable silence and climbed into bed. Theron pulled Celeste against him, her back to his chest, his arm draped over her waist. 6 months ago you couldn't shift, he murmured into her hair. Now you're the most powerful wolf on the continent. Doesn't it feel strange? Every day, Celeste admitted, but the strangeness is good. It means I haven't settled, haven't become complacent. The day this feels normal is the day I need to worry. Good, Theron said. Never stop unsettling them. They need it. Celeste smiled in the darkness. What about you? Do you need unsettling? Constantly. His hand splayed across her stomach. You're very good at it. They were quiet for a while, listening to the fire crackle and the wind move across the mountains. Then Theron spoke again, his voice different now, heavier with something he'd been carrying. There's talk in the council, he said, about heirs, about the Lunaris bloodline continuing. Celeste felt her body tense. Let me guess, Thaddeus and others, they want certainty, want to know the power will pass to the next generation. The power isn't mine to pass, Celeste said firmly. The Lunaris wolf chose me. It will choose who comes next if anyone comes next. That's not something I can force or plan or schedule according to council preferences. I know, Theron said quickly. I told them that. Told them the Lunaris heir doesn't work on political timelines. He paused. But they're not wrong that it matters. If something happened to you, then the wolf would return to dormancy and wait for the next carrier. Celeste interrupted. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked. The Lunaris bloodline doesn't die. It sleeps. She rolled over to face him, even though she could barely see his features in the firelight. I'm not opposed to children, she said, but I'm also not going to have them because a council demands it. If we have children, it will be because we want them, because we're ready, because we can give them a world worth inheriting. And are we building that, Theron asked, a world worth inheriting? Celeste thought about the 12 safe houses, the healing protocols, the refugees who arrived each week and found sanctuary instead of judgment, the wolfless children who would receive soul anchors in time and protection while their wolves matured. She thought about Vivian ruling the Eastern Territories with competence instead of cruelty, about Garrett living with his shame in a small territory that no one feared, about the slow grinding work of changing laws and customs and expectations. "We're trying," she said, "and that's more than most people can say." Theron kissed her forehead. "Then that's enough, for now." They fell asleep tangled together, and Celeste dreamed of white wolves running beneath stars that had not yet been born. The next morning, Celeste woke to find a young wolf waiting in the courtyard. She was maybe 15, thin as a rail, with dark hair cut short and eyes that held too much wariness for someone so young. She stood with her arms wrapped around herself, clearly uncomfortable in the formal setting of the lichen court. Ilara stood beside her, one hand on the girl's shoulder. "This is Mara," Ilara said as Celeste approached. "She came from the Western Territories. 3 days' walk. She heard about the soul anchors." Celeste knelt so she was at eye level with the girl. "You're wolfless." Mara nodded, her chin trembling slightly. "My pack says I'm broken. Says I should leave before I contaminate the strong ones." She swallowed hard. "I heard you were wolfless too, until you weren't." "That's true," Celeste said. "My wolf was sleeping, waiting. Just because yours hasn't arrived yet doesn't mean it never will." "But what if it doesn't?" Mara's voice cracked. "What if I'm just broken?" Celeste reached out and took the girl's hands in hers. "Then you're still worth everything. Your worth doesn't come from your wolf. It comes from you, from your courage to walk 3 days to a place you've never been to ask for help from strangers. That takes strength most wolves will never have." She stood and gestured for Mara to follow. "Come with me. I want to show you something." They walked to the archive, down through the mountain to the circular chamber where knowledge waited in patient rows. Celeste led Mara to the case containing her mother's bracelet. "This belonged to my mother," Celeste said, "and then to me. It held my wolf for 22 years, protected it, gave it time to mature, and when the time was right, it opened." Mara stared at the split moonstone, her eyes wide. "We're making one for you," Celeste continued, "a soul anchor of your own. It won't force your wolf to appear, but it will protect the possibility. We'll give you time without the pressure. Time to be young, time to grow, time to discover who you are with or without a wolf." "And if the wolf never comes," Mara asked quietly. "Then you'll have lived a full life anyway," Celeste said, "and you'll have a place here in Silver Peak where your worth is recognized regardless." Mara's face crumpled, and she started to cry. Not sad tears, relief tears, the kind that come when you've been holding your breath for years and someone finally tells you it's okay to exhale. Celeste held her while she cried and thought about all the other Maras out there. All the children who believed they were broken because their magic hadn't arrived on schedule. All the wolves who measured their worth by someone else's definition of strength. She would build something better for them. Not quickly, not easily, but brick by brick, law by law, safe house by safe house. She would build a world where worth was inherent rather than earned, where power was a responsibility rather than a trophy, where the girl thrown away in the rain could become the woman who changed everything. That evening, Celeste returned to the East Garden with Theron. They sat on the same bench, watching the same sunset, but everything was different now. "Thaddeus resigned from the council today," Theron said. Celeste raised an eyebrow. "Voluntarily?" "More or less. He realized he was fighting a tide that wasn't going to turn. The younger council members support your initiatives. The refugees are integrating well. The safe houses are proving their worth. He could either adapt or leave, and he chose to leave with some dignity intact." "Good," Celeste said. "I'm not interested in breaking people, but I'm not going to slow down for people who can't keep up." The valley was filling with evening song again. Wolves calling to each other across the distances, voices finding harmony, building something together. Celeste felt her own wolf stir inside her, content and powerful and fully awake. It had been sleeping for so long, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And now that it was here, now that it walked alongside her consciousness like a partner rather than a possession, she understood what her mother had known. The extraordinary thing had always been inside her. Not the wolf itself, but the capacity to hold it, the patience to wait for it, the strength to protect it until it was ready. And now that it had arrived, Celeste would use it the way power was meant to be used. Not for conquest, not for control, but for protection, for building, for transformation, for making sure that no child ever again had to believe they were broken just because they were still becoming. Theron laced his fingers through hers, and they sat together as the stars came out. One by one, and like promises being kept, like light returning to places that had been dark too long. The bracelet rested in its case in the archive below. The soul anchor had served its purpose. The wolf was home, And the real work of building a world worth inheriting was just beginning. Some gifts, Celeste thought, are not meant to be carried forever. Some are meant to be opened, used, and then set down so your hands are free for what comes next. She held Theron's hand and felt the future spreading out before them like a map still being drawn. There would be challenges, resistance, setbacks and struggles, and moments when progress felt impossible. But she had walked through rain and forest and faced down an army, had woken a wolf that had slept for centuries, had turned humiliation into power and pain into purpose. She was not afraid of the work ahead. The white wolf inside her settled with a deep contentment, and Celeste smiled into the gathering dark. The extraordinary thing had finally arrived, and it was only the beginning.